Welcome to the Divine Style podcast, where the journey to self-love and spiritual awakening begins. I'm your host, Gerlinda Stella, a psychic medium, intuitive life coach, and guide on your path to self-discovery. Here we delve deep into the heart of what it means to truly know and love oneself. Welcome to the Divine Style. This week, I'm so excited to have a very special guest join me. We have Dr. Jennifer Lisa Vest. She's a scientist, philosopher, intuitive. She holds a PhD in Indigenous philosophy, an MA in history, a BA in physics. She was a philosophy professor, and spiritually, Dr. Vest is a medical intuitive, an Akashic Records reader, is a certified quantum healing hypnosis technique practitioner, a Master Reiki practitioner, and has been trained in the traditions of African American Hoodoo, Native American Sweat Lodge, Jamaican Revivalism, Trinidadian, oh my gosh, I knew I would mess this one up, Trinidadian Shango, and spiritualism for community elders. That is a whole mouthful of stuff. You have a wealth of knowledge. Thank you for joining me on The Divine Style.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
You've recently written a book called The Ethical Psychic, and I was fortunate enough to get a copy and read through this. And gosh, it's just a wealth of insights and knowledge. And I can't wait to speak with you about this. I do want to do these podcasts in a two-part session because I really want to get to know more about you and all of those amazing healing techniques that you are skilled at and learned at, and you've also taught a lot of these yourself. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got started, a bit about your background and what sort of led you down this spiritual path?
Okay. Let's see. So I started out when I was born, I had spirits around me, and as a child, I had spirit teachers who would take me out of my body at night and take me to spirit school and take me on travels. And so I always had gifts. I come from a family where I had gifted people on both sides of the family. My mother's psychic, and on my mother's side, all of the women have the gift. And on my father's side, my grandfather and my great grandmother were gifted. And so early on, I had these experiences. And then I also had in my family, my mother kind of picking me out and saying, "You're the one that has the gift," among the children that she had. Of course, we all have it, but you know how some of us just manifest it in ways that can't be hidden, and other people are better at kind of suppressing it. I always tell my sisters, "You could do this too," and they're like, "Yeah, but we don't want to."
I was there for a long time. I get it.
Right? And then my great grandmother picked me out also as somebody with the gift, and so at an early age, I was kind of identified, but I wasn't really that comfortable with it because I was teased, and it was scary that people were going to call me crazy. And so I had this kind of ambivalent relationship with my gifts for much of my early life, where I would have really intense experiences, but I was really worried about people finding out about them. And so, like, for example, as a child, when I was, say, 10 years old, I used to spontaneously channel in my sleep. This was extremely embarrassing and problematic because I could not go to slumber parties without, there being an incident. And so, I was always afraid of having people sleep in the same room with me, and people didn't want to sleep in the same room with me. I always channeled like men's voices in other languages. So it was disturbing to people. It wasn't like something being go lucky.
So it was and so you're talking about physical channeling where spirits enter and then will use your body as a way to speak through you.
Exactly.
That would have been scary.
I didn't know how to control it, and it was just, kind of scary. And so I had these experiences, and then I kind of, as a young person, I kept getting teachings from different people that I was not seeking. And so teachers kept showing up and telling me, "Hey, you've got this gift. I'm going to train you." And so when I went to Jamaica, I ended up getting trained. And when I went to Trinidad, I ended up getting trained. And in both of these situations, I wasn't going there for that. I was there as a scholar. And so for many years, I was convinced I was just going to be an intellectual. I was going to be a scholar. I was on this path, getting all these degrees. And I was trying to keep this side of my life kind of quiet. because academics really do not respect psychics. And there's just so much prejudice in academia against this type of work. And so I was trying to kind of live two separate lives. And at a certain point, I got sick. When I got my first professorship, I got really sick, like kind of right before that. And I was going to different doctors and I tried everything. I went to therapy, I did hypnotherapy, I did different, alternative medicine, I did naturopathy, acupuncture, I went to regular, Western doctors. I did ceremony, and I did all of these things, but I was still sick. And finally, my dad took me to a medical intuitive in Phoenix. And my dad has always known all of these really interesting psychics, and healers. And again, one of these people who has gifts that he doesn't really manifest the way I do, and he doesn't really want to. But he is an intuitive person who tends to attract other intuitive people into his life. And so I was visiting. He said, "Oh, I know this person. She calls herself a medical intuitive. Let's go see her." And so I went to see this medical intuitive. And one of the things that she told me was, "You're not really accepting and developing your gifts. You have this, relationship with your gifts you're not really fully embracing them. And until you fully embrace them, you're going to stay sick." And I thought, well, I will do anything to get better. And so she said, "You have to take psychic development classes." And so up until this point, all of the training I had gotten had come to me, right? I had never asked for it. I had never sought it out. It was always people coming in, training me, and me kind of begrudgingly going along with it. Well, at this point, I had to be the one to say, okay, I'm going to take this seriously. I'm going to seek out teachers. And that's when I started to train with the spiritualists. And I spent 5 years in training with several different teachers, psychic, mediumship, eventually Reiki, spiritual healing. And it wasn't, and then even still, I was professor by day, psychic by night. I was still keeping it quiet, and so there were certain people in my life who knew who I really was, and there were other people who just thought I was a philosopher. And then eventually I ended up leaving academia and finally embracing this path full time, hanging a shingle, becoming a medical intuitive. And yeah, so that's where I am now.
Phenomenal, because I think medical intuitives, a lot of people are searching, in the state of the world today, the different reasons why we are getting sick. And obviously, through the way that we get sick, we think about it on a mental, emotional, spiritual, or physical plane. Do you always believe that it starts off as a mental?
No. And I think that one of the reasons why so many people don't get better is because in the healthcare system, at least here in the United States, we don't have the best, healthcare system here. First of all, you have to have money, and depending on what kind of insurance you have, that's the quality of the healthcare you get. But we also just have a healthcare system that doesn't really handle women very well, and which doesn't understand the emotional component of illness very well. And so what happens in this country is that if women go to doctors, and if their illness is complicated, or it's not an illness that men get, then a lot of times the doctors will tell them, "Oh, we can't find the cause," or "There's nothing wrong," or it's in your mind, it's mental, or it's emotional. And their understanding of emotional and mental causes of illness is that means it's not real, or that means it's not physical. And that simply isn't the case. So most of the people that come to me, and I should make a little disclaimer right now, I'm on a sabbatical from seeing clients right now. So I have to say this because so many people will be reaching out after each interview to say, "I want to do a session." I'm not doing sessions right now. I'm writing and teaching. But so many people that have come to me over the years for medical intuition sessions, so many women will come to me with very serious illnesses that, yes, have an emotional component, because most illness does have an emotional or mental component, but they actually have physical problems which need to be addressed, and they haven't been. And so I know that I think I did have a teacher at some point, maybe in spiritual healing or one of my classes, that I have heard this argument that illness begins, you have to look at the layers of the aura, and that it begins further out before it hits the physical body. And so an illness can begin in, the outer layers of your aura, and it can begin, say, in the mental layer or the emotional layer of your aura, and it will be there before it manifests as a physical problem. And so, yes, that is the case. But there's also spiritual causes of illness. And so some illnesses don't have any mental or emotional component. They're purely spiritual. And so in that case, you have an illness, and these are often the case when you have like congenital illnesses. So when people are born with something, there's no emotional, mental cause. It was a decision that was made before they incarnated, because the illness has a particular spiritual purpose. Either it's going to be a vehicle for them to teach the world something, for them to teach us an inner circle something, for them to teach their family something, or it's going to be a vehicle for them to learn something. Sometimes it's karmic. They're balancing out something from a past life, where in the past life, they had, they were disabled, and in this life they decide to come as the caretaker of a disabled person, or vice versa, so that they can have both sides of the experience. And so with spiritual causes of illness, you can't say that it started as a mental or emotional, but it kind of does make sense. If you have that perception of illness as moving through the aura, you can see it coming from a much further layer as a spiritual cause. But everything is not going to come as a spiritual and then an emotional, and then spiritual, then a mental, then emotional, then physical. It's not always that linear,
Fabulous, because I think there is those misconceptions when people are in this sort of spiritual space, where they think, I can just fix it with my mind, but there is other, like you said, there is other causes, and obviously going to a medical intuitive, or even just within yourself meditating and sitting, and we can find these answers out, can't we? Obviously, we can get a little lost within ourselves, and we have all of our own beliefs and values and things that can get all messed up in the middle. So sometimes that's why it is important to be able to find the right people to help you.
Yeah, I think there's an over focus on, individuality, and then combining that with toxic positivity can put a lot of spiritual people in a situation where they blame themselves for their illness, where their community blames them for their illness. It's seen as a failure. And then they can't get better, because you can't get better in the context of blame and guilt.
That is so true. That is, and very powerful for people to hear and recognize, because I think I have friends and clients who have got children with these that have been born in with these illnesses, and there is a lot of blame and guilt on the parents' behalf, thinking that maybe they've done something wrong, or they've contributed to it. And I mean, in society, people talk about drinking and smoking, which is obviously very bad for a fetus. But if you don't know that you're pregnant at the time, people can then look for things to blame and to create more guilt, and that's never going to solve it. So I think hearing those things about those karmic lessons about being a carer and being a caregiver can also ease a lot of that suffering that people go through blame and guilt. So that's still quite in the mind. So how did you move, like, from going from philosophy, because it's still, did you tend to, in your lessons, did you find the spirituality within those lessons?
Well, something funny kind of happened when I was a philosophy professor. So my areas of specialization were cross-cultural philosophy. I did Native American philosophy, African American, Caribbean, feminist philosophy, and I taught a lot of. But I also taught, the general classes as any professor does. And so I taught ethics. I taught an intro to philosophy class. And what I would do is I would teach them differently. So I would teach intro to philosophy in a cross-cultural way. So I would not just teach dead white men. I would teach everybody in the world who had, philosophical texts. And I would also do that with ethics. And what I found that I found that my big focus as a teacher was in trying to get my students to basically get some clarity on their life purpose. And so what tended to happen with my students is I was, giving them all these assignments to get them to think about their purpose for being on the planet, and then doing it through these philosophical texts. And then what was happening was they were all showing up in my office hours wanting to talk not about Aristotle or Kant or Jetchi or whoever we were teaching, but they wanted to talk about these, you know, experiences they were having with ghosts and spirits and out of body travel and and vision and dreams. And somehow it became known in this kind of underground way on campus among students that if you had any questions about having gifts or dreams or any peculiar experiences, that Dr. Vess was the person you wanted to talk to. And my colleagues didn't know this. My colleagues just thought of me as a philosophy professor, and they didn't know this other side of me. And even though I tried to keep it under wraps, it wasn't something I advertised. I didn't talk about it explicitly in my classes. Somehow the students all figured it out. And I guess it's because they would come to my office hours and I would end up giving them what was probably more accurately described as, life purpose coaching than, tutoring.
Which is phenomenal. That's amazing.
Yeah. So yeah, they kind of, and then I even started having some students coming out to my house. I was living in a spiritualist community where the whole community was mediums and healers. That was it, in the woods, an hour from campus. And I would have people coming out there and doing healing ceremonies and having cooking dinner for them and stuff. And so then, the jig was up. They knew at that point who I really was. But still, I was trying to keep it quiet from my colleagues because they just had such disdain for supersensory people. And that's something that has to change. It's one of the things that I'm really committed to changing, because I have, a background in both areas. I've done a lot of training in the academic sense, where I have a lot of degrees and I was a professor, but then I also have done a lot of training in healing and psychic development. And I do think that we need to bring these two together. So I am working on a school of psychic and science where we can bring these together. I don't think we should have these kind of separate ways of dealing with the world, and have separate communities where the academics are over here and the psychics are over here, and they mistrust each other.
And it is fascinating from a history perspective, isn't it, that it was the healers and the psychics that were originally the people that were looked to for healers for all these different, from medicines to what was happening in the world to prophecy. And then it somehow there was a switch around to the focus being on science, and they can marry up and they can work very well together. And it would be a wonderful place. I know there's a lot of doctors now, that I'm aware of in Australia, that are definitely going down a more holistic path and wanting to focus more on patient health from all different layers and levels to assist. So I think slowly but surely, the more of us that are open to it, the more we can start to create a different world.
Yeah, and I do see changes happening slowly. At least in this country, it's more slowly. But I've been reading a lot about changes in other countries, which are really hopeful to me. Like in Peru, they actually, the medicine people and the doctors are working together in the hospitals. And this is also happening in South Africa. The Sangomas are respected and are working with doctors. And so there is this movement worldwide to make these changes.
One of the things that you did talk about in your book, which I do want to touch on in this session, was talking about cultural appropriation. And I think that it is something that I've seen in this country. We have, an Indigenous population that were here for, 75,000 years before we came along. And it is really interesting to be part of something that to have seen where their own spirituality has been squashed and taken down, and that because obviously there was a big Christian movement that came in at the time, and we have things like stolen generation, and there's a lot of generational trauma that we have in this country. I find that a lot of those old spiritual practices have been lost or are still underground. So it's sort of, there's this dynamic within culture that it still feels secretive. And then if people do kind of delve in, and when we talk about appropriation, I know that people go on, and that I've heard, that they'll go on to sacred lands here without talking to elders, without talking to people of the community, and they're running practices that are from different countries. So whether that be from Peru, or that, you know, they take bits and pieces from different people's cultures and then make it a thing, which you do definitely, like you discuss in great detail in your book, The Ethical Psychic, which I thought was so important in this day and age. So I guess my question is then, when it comes to things like Reiki, and you do talk about this a little bit in the book as well, but then where is the line in terms of people that are curious about healing, and traditional healing, whether that be in Australia or the US, when it comes to that cultural appropriation side of things? Because obviously I'm a white woman. I was my family, my father's English, my heritage is Scottish and German, and I feel that growing up in Australia, like I, you know, in terms of culture, I don't really, like, I'm a little lost for myself. So I just wonder how you explain that.
Well, it's something that comes up a lot when I'm teaching, because, you know, people are really interested in indigenous cultures, and for good reason, because there's a lot of wisdom that has been passed down and kept. And you have other people who are from cultures where the indigenous traditions from their culture have been suppressed and not passed down. And so, of course, what I tell my students is everybody is connected to a tradition. And so everybody can kind of research their own tradition. So I have some people, you know, who take classes with me who are from, say, England or France or the US, but they're Scottish American or Irish American. And I will tell them, well, you know, look at the Celts, look at the Celtic traditions that your people descend from. And you will probably find some really rich material there that is linked to who you are. So that's one path that people can take, is to figure out, you know, who am I connected to? What traditions am I actually connected to? And let me learn about those and honor my ancestors. You know, one of the things I tell people is that's really important to honor your ancestors. And some of us are very mixed. I'm a totally mixed person. And so the people, you know, the traditions that I practice are a mixture of the traditions that I descend from. And so I was, and the funny thing is I got trained in some of them, and I without trying. And so your ancestors will hook you up. They will lead you down the right path. You know, I got trained in Jamaica and Trinidad in Afro-Caribbean traditions with African roots, you know, and I actually am, you know, I have African and Caribbean roots. I was trained in Native American Sweat Lodge. I'm Native American. I was trained then by the white spiritualists, and I also have German and Norwegian blood. So, you know, I ended up getting trained in traditions that I'm descended from. I also got trained in one I'm not descended from, which is Reiki. Reiki originally comes from Japan. And, you know, Reiki is interesting because, you know, Reiki came from Japan, but then it went to Hawaii and it became a US thing. And it wasn't really developed in Japan for quite a while. Now it is really seeing a huge revival in Japan. And now there are people saying, oh, well, the American version and the Japanese version are different, and we should, people should only be practicing, you know. And so now there's like some disputes coming up. But what's important when you get training is that you have been trained by somebody who has permission to train you, because they were given permission. And so it's about your lineage more than about your, you know, your blood. So like I was trained in Reiki by Maureen Gates, and she was able in class to trace her lineage back. And that's what you want. You want a teacher who can say, I was trained by this teacher who was trained by this teacher. She didn't just like, you know, decide one day she was a Reiki practitioner. She was trained, and then she had permission. She was given the attunements to have permission to train others. And so that's true in all traditions, that there are people who are given permission and then they pass it on to other people. When people get into trouble, and the example I like to give a lot currently is ayahuasca. People get into trouble because they go to Peru. They have an experience with a medicine person in Peru taking ayahuasca and having a vision. And then they want to come back to the United States or to whatever country they're from. Maybe it's happening in Australia. And they want to run their own ceremonies, except that nobody gave them permission to do that. And so they're not doing it properly. They're not doing it responsibly. It's not safe for the people that they're doing it for. People are going to potentially get hurt. And that's an example of cultural appropriation. And cultural appropriation hurts so many people. It hurts the people that you're practicing it on, because then you're not doing it properly, and people get hurt in your ceremonies because they're not protected. It hurts your own spiritual development if you're somebody who is a healer or a practitioner and now you're practicing things incorrectly, right? That's going to stunt your growth. And then it hurts the community that you've taken the information from, because you've extracted practices, but you haven't given anything back. And anytime you have a non-reciprocal relationship with the medicine group or a cultural group, you're doing a harm. Right. And so if you want to learn about that tradition, then go and talk to a medicine person in that tradition and ask them, go up to them respectfully, present them with tobacco or whatever is the appropriate gift in that culture, and say, I would like to know if I can learn this, or I would like you to come to my country and lead a ceremony for my friends, and we will pay you, we will feed you, we will take care of you, right? And you make sure that there's a respectful, reciprocal relationship between you and the knowledge holder. When you don't do that, then we get into cultural appropriation, extracting culture out, and not respecting, where it's coming from. And this gets us into big trouble with ethics, which is part of why I wrote this book. Is because I noticed, as somebody who had been trained by different teachers in different environments, what I noticed was when I was being trained by, indigenous teachers, by teachers, in the Caribbean, by teachers, Native American, that character was always emphasized. Character and ethics were always emphasized. And yet, if you go and take a class, some of these casual classes, like psychic development class, a lot of times the teachers were not teaching about that. And so I had students coming to me and telling me, no one else is teaching us this. And then they began to question, some of them questioned me, like, well, why should we listen to you when no one else is saying we have to be a good person to be a good psychic? Like, what is all this nonsense about? You have to, think about how you're interacting with other people in your community, and how you're sharing your gifts, and like they didn't always want to hear about it. But this is why people culturally appropriate. Part of it is because people want to take the exciting, sparkly stuff out, but they don't want to bring the other stuff along, like the responsibilities and the rules and the
yes.
And so they just want to we just want the drug. Just give us the drug. We want to have the trip. We don't want to spend a week fasting. We don't want to have to give up all of these practices that, that we're told we're not allowed to practice while we're engaging in ceremony. We don't want to have to speak a certain way to everybody for days. We don't want to have to dress a certain way. We don't want to follow all these rules. We just want to have the fun part. Just give us we just want to have that fun experience. Or like with sound healing, people were, we just want the music. We want the music, but we don't want to know about the culture the music comes from and what comes along with the music. Or like, I remember I had this person, when I used to have people come and see me, I burn herbs. I burn like Palo Santo or sage in my space. And I play music, and I have, different ritual items and whatnot. And I remember this one person came in and said, I should have told you before I got here that, I can't tolerate sage, or you can't burn anything when I'm doing a session. And I said, well, it doesn't matter if you told me that. And if you had told me that in advance, I just would have told you that you should cancel the appointment, because I'm not going to do it without my ceremonial herbs. There's a purpose for those ceremonial herbs. It's not decoration. It's to cleanse the space and to cleanse the person coming in and to keep them safe. And so, but they're, in the US, people are so individualistic. They're like, well, I want it this way. I want it, they want to control the environment that they're going into when they're having a healing. And that's not how it's done. you know. Um
I'm laughing because I've had someone say that too. Please don't burn incense. And I'm like, but it's part of the ritual that I practice. But it is,
right.
but I think at the time, this was this was a couple of years ago now. I think I was so focused on you, and I think that's that fine line again, isn't it? Making sure that somebody feels comfortable. But again, like you said, had she told me in advance, it was because she showed up and said, oh no, I can't, I'm having allergies or something. And so, and yeah, it's interesting that people pleasing for me, where I end up going into that instead of holding true in those rituals and those practices that keep, as you said, keep everybody safe. And also that's the way that I do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and of course you do want your client to be comfortable. So I'm not saying that I just disregard their comfort. I do a lot of things to make sure they're comfortable. I actually pick the music according to them. I don't ask them, but I tune in and I pick the music. And sometimes I will say, how do you like this music? I'll make sure oh yeah, I like that music. So I do different things to make them comfortable. But we can't go overboard with that, because if no one's allergic to sage, so sometimes I'll take the time and explain this to people. Nobody is allergic to sage. However, if you have an attachment, your attachment will be allergic to sage. Allergic, it's not really allergic, it's that they don't want to be in an environment with sage because it's going to cause them to have to leave, or it's going to change the vibration. And so when you're having a negative reaction to sage, it's not a physical allergy, it's a spiritual issue. And that's probably why you need the sage. And so, no, I've never, hundreds of clients, I have never had anyone have an allergic reaction to sage. And I'm someone who has allergies, so I am sympathetic. There's no such thing.
Oh, that's awesome. I had a big aha moment there and then full goosebumps. So like it makes so much sense, doesn't it? When somebody is being resistant to something that's going to potentially help them, it could show up as an allergy, but like you said, it's not physical. It's it's the attachment that's there that's not wanting
And
it.
that's why these people, I will never see them having an allergic reaction. They'll never be like sneezing or coughing. They'll just verbally be saying, I don't want sage. But they're not allergic. They're just spiritually afraid.
Yeah. And because those are, and you do mention this in the book too, about having those attachments that people don't want to let go of. And so there are times where it's unethical to remove something if you're not getting permission from the person when they're not ready to let go, because you could be doing damage.
Right. Yeah. You can't just remove things willy-nilly. And some people they're not ready to let go of their attachments. And that's their choice.
Yeah. Yeah. I would love to break here because we are going to bring you back for a second episode and really delve more into your book, The Ethical Psychic. So thank you so much for your time. We will take a bit of a break and then we will come back to you with part 2.
Thanks. Thank you so much.
As we end today's episode of the Divine Style podcast, I extend my deepest gratitude for your presence and openness on this journey of self-love, self-discovery, and spiritual growth. Farewell for now, and may your journey inward bring you the self-love you seek.